March 30th, 1981. The world watched in horror as President Ronald Reagan was shot outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. John Hinckley Jr. was arrested immediately, labeled as a lone gunman obsessed with actress Jodie Foster. Case closed. Or so they wanted you to believe. 43 years later, a dying CIA operative named Thomas Mitchell made a confession that would shatter everything Americans thought they knew about that day. On his deathbed in a Virginia hospital, Mitchell revealed the truth. Hinckley wasn't working alone. And the real target wasn't just Reagan. It was American democracy itself. Mitchell had been a CIA field operative for 37 years. He had toppled governments, eliminated foreign threats, and kept America's darkest secrets. But in his final hours, the weight of one particular secret had become unbearable. "I helped plan the Reagan assassination," he whispered to his estranged son, David, who was visiting him for the first time in 15 years. "We weren't trying to kill him for politics. We were trying to save the country from him." David Mitchell, an investigative journalist, initially thought his father was hallucinating from the pain medication. But then Thomas reached under his hospital pillow and pulled out something that made David's blood run cold. A manila envelope, yellowed with age, marked Operation Patriot in red letters. Inside were photographs, documents, and tape recordings that revealed a conspiracy so deep it reached the highest levels of the American intelligence community. The CIA hadn't just known about Hinckley's plan, they had orchestrated it. But here's what shocked David most about his father's confession. The assassination attempt wasn't random. It was carefully timed to occur exactly 69 days into Reagan's presidency, and the reason why would expose a plot that threatened the very foundation of American government. Reagan had discovered something during his first weeks in office, something so dangerous that a shadow group within the CIA decided he had to be eliminated before he could act on it. Thomas Mitchell had been part of a secret unit called the Guardians, a group of intelligence officers who believed they knew what was best for America, regardless of who was elected president. For 40 years, they had been manipulating elections, eliminating threats, and controlling American foreign policy from the shadows. Reagan wasn't supposed to win the 1980 election. The Guardians had spent millions ensuring Jimmy Carter's victory. But when Reagan won in a landslide, they realized they had a problem. The new president was asking questions, demanding access to classified files that no president had ever seen. And worst of all, he was planning to expose a secret that could destroy everything the Guardians had built. Thomas pulled out a tape recorder from the envelope. It was old, the kind used in the 1980s. With shaking hands, he pressed play, and suddenly the hospital room filled with Ronald Reagan's voice, recorded just 2 weeks before the assassination attempt. "I know what you people have been doing. I know about the drugs, the assassinations, the elections you've rigged, and I'm going to expose every last one of you." The voice responding to Reagan was Thomas Mitchell himself, 43 years younger, but just as cold. "Mr. President, I think you misunderstand your role in this government. You work for us, not the other way around."
David stared at his father in horror. The tape continued, revealing a conversation that had taken place in the Oval Office just 2 weeks before the shooting. Reagan had summoned Mitchell and 2 other CIA officials to confront them about a document he had discovered in the presidential archives. "This operation," Reagan's voice continued on the tape, Operation Mockingbird, Operation Chaos, the Kennedy assassination files. How long did you think you could hide this from the American people? Thomas Mitchell's voice on the tape was calm, almost bored. Mr. President, every administration learns these truths eventually, and every administration makes the same choice. They stay quiet, they play along, and they serve their 4 or 8 years without causing problems. Well, I'm not every president, Reagan had responded. I'm going public with all of it. The American people deserve to know what their government has really been doing for the past 40 years. That's when the threats began. On the tape, Mitchell's voice grew darker. Sir, I would strongly advise against that course of action. Previous presidents who have considered similar revelations have found themselves facing unexpected challenges. Reagan's response would echo through history. Are you threatening the President of the United States? I'm protecting the President of the United States from himself. Thomas stopped the tape and looked at his son with tears in his eyes. 3 days later, we activated John Hinckley. But here's what even Thomas Mitchell didn't know at the time. Reagan had been recording that entire conversation, and he had hidden copies of every classified document in a location that even the Guardians couldn't find. The assassination attempt wasn't just meant to kill Reagan. It was meant to send a message to any future president who might get similar ideas about transparency and truth. But the Guardians had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated Ronald Reagan's Hollywood background. The man who had spent decades memorizing scripts and anticipating plot twists had seen this betrayal coming from miles away. Reagan had been preparing for an assassination attempt since his first week in office. He had secretly been wearing a bulletproof vest every day. He had changed his schedules at the last minute, and most importantly, he had been building his own network of loyal agents within the CIA and Secret Service. The Hinckley shooting was supposed to kill Reagan with the first bullet. Instead, it barely wounded him. That wasn't luck. That was preparation. Thomas reached into the envelope again and pulled out a hospital bracelet. It was Reagan's, from George Washington University Hospital, where he had been taken after the shooting. We had people inside the hospital, doctors, nurses, even security guards. The plan was to finish the job while he was on the operating table, make it look like complications from surgery. David's hands were shaking as he held his father's confession. What stopped you? Thomas smiled for the first time in their conversation. Nancy Reagan. The First Lady had refused to leave her husband's side for even a moment. She had personally screened every doctor, every nurse, every person who entered Reagan's room. And she had brought her own security team, loyal Hollywood friends who weren't part of the Washington establishment. But more importantly, Nancy had brought something else, a tape recorder. She had recorded every conversation, every medical procedure, every person who came near her husband. She knew something was wrong, and she was building evidence. We couldn't risk it. Too many witnesses, too many recordings. So we had to wait for another opportunity. But that opportunity never came, because Reagan had learned something during his recovery that changed everything.
While Reagan was recovering in the hospital, something extraordinary happened. A nurse named Maria Santos, who had been working at George Washington University Hospital for 15 years, approached Nancy Reagan with information that would change the course of history. Santos had been recruited by the Guardians 3 years earlier. Her job was simple: monitor important patients and report any unusual conversations or visitors. She had done this for dozens of politicians, diplomats, and military officials. But when she saw Reagan lying in that hospital bed, fighting for his life, something inside her broke. "Mrs. Reagan," she had whispered during a quiet moment, "your husband was never supposed to survive today, and there are people in this hospital who are still trying to make sure he doesn't." Nancy Reagan's response was swift and decisive. She immediately called George Shultz, Reagan's most trusted advisor, and told him to clear the hospital of all non-essential personnel. Within 2 hours, the Secret Service had conducted a complete security sweep and found something that terrified them. Hidden in the ceiling above Reagan's recovery room was a small device. It looked like a smoke detector, but it was actually a sophisticated listening device connected to a tiny camera. The Guardians had been monitoring Reagan's every word, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But Nancy had a surprise for them. She had Reagan's personal lawyer, William French Smith, secretly smuggle something into the hospital room. It was a metal briefcase that Reagan had hidden in the White House residence on his first day in office. Inside that briefcase were photocopies of every classified document Reagan had discovered. Evidence of illegal CIA operations dating back to the 1940s. Proof of election manipulation, foreign assassinations, and domestic surveillance programs that violated the Constitution. But most shocking of all, the briefcase contained a list of names. Every member of the Guardians, every politician they controlled, every judge they had compromised, every journalist they had bought. When Reagan regained consciousness, Nancy showed him the listening device they had found. Reagan smiled weakly and whispered something that Maria Santos would never forget. "Tell them I said hello." That night, Reagan made a decision that would define the rest of his presidency. Instead of exposing the Guardians publicly, he would play a different game. He would pretend to cooperate while secretly dismantling their operations from within. Thomas Mitchell and his team thought they had won. Reagan seemed compliant after the shooting. He stopped asking difficult questions. He followed their advice on foreign policy. He appeared to be just another controlled president. But Reagan was actually conducting the greatest intelligence operation in American history. Using his Hollywood connections, his personal friends, and a network of loyal agents, he began identifying and eliminating Guardian operations one by one. "We didn't realize what was happening for almost 2 years," Thomas confessed to his son. "Reagan was so good at playing the role of the cooperative president that we actually believed he had given up. But slowly, Guardian assets started disappearing. Foreign operations were mysteriously exposed. Corrupt politicians found themselves under investigation. And one by one, members of the Guardians began dying in what appeared to be accidents." Thomas pulled out another document from the envelope. It was a death certificate dated September 15, 1983. The name on it was William Colby, former CIA director and founding member of the Guardians. Colby was found dead in a canoe, supposedly drowned while fishing alone. But we knew better. Reagan had him killed. The document Thomas showed his son wasn't the official death certificate. It was an internal Guardian report that revealed the truth. Colby had been eliminated by Reagan's team after he threatened to expose the president's counter-operation. By 1984, the Guardians realized they were at war with their own president, and Reagan was winning. The final confrontation came in December 1986, during what the public knew as the Iran-Contra scandal. But the real story was far more complex and dangerous than anything reported in the news. Iran-Contra wasn't a rogue operation run by overeager officials. It was the Guardians' last desperate attempt to destroy Reagan by framing him for illegal arms sales and funding violations. Oliver North, the Marine colonel who became the public face of the scandal, was actually a Guardian operative who had infiltrated Reagan's National Security Council. His job was to create a paper trail that would implicate Reagan in illegal activities and force his resignation. But Reagan had known about North's true loyalties for months. Through his network of loyal agents, Reagan had been feeding North false information while building a case against the Guardians themselves. Thomas Mitchell was part of the team assigned to oversee North's operation. They thought they were orchestrating Reagan's downfall. Instead, they were walking into a trap that Reagan had been setting for 5 years. The Iran-Contra hearings were supposed to end Reagan's presidency, Thomas told his son. Instead, they ended us. During the congressional investigations, Reagan's team quietly leaked information about Guardian operations to sympathetic members of Congress. While the public focused on North's testimony about arms sales, a secret parallel investigation was exposing 40 years of CIA corruption. By the time the hearings ended, 14 Guardian operatives had been quietly arrested or transferred to remote assignments. Their bank accounts had been frozen, their operations had been shut down, and their network of political contacts had been systematically dismantled. Thomas Mitchell was one of the lucky ones. Instead of being prosecuted, he was offered a deal. Cooperate with Reagan's investigation, provide information about remaining Guardian assets, and spend the rest of his career in a meaningless desk job at CIA headquarters. "I thought about refusing," Thomas admitted. "I thought about fighting back. But Reagan had made it clear what happened to people who opposed him." The evidence was overwhelming. During Reagan's presidency, 17 former Guardian operatives had died in accidents. Car crashes, heart attacks, suicides, even a few disappearances that were never solved. Each death appeared natural or random, but the pattern was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. Reagan had become everything the Guardians feared. A president who couldn't be controlled, bought, or intimidated. And he had used their own methods against them. But the most shocking revelation in Thomas Mitchell's confession came near the end of their conversation. Reagan hadn't just defeated the Guardians, he had replaced them. The network of loyal agents Reagan built during his presidency didn't disappear when he left office. They became a new kind of shadow organization, one dedicated to protecting American democracy instead of subverting it. "Every president since Reagan has been protected by his people," Thomas whispered. Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, they all have Reagan loyalists watching over them, making sure no group like the Guardians ever gains power again. David Mitchell stared at his father in amazement. "You're telling me Reagan created his own deep state?" "Not a deep state," Thomas corrected. "A Guardian state. People who serve the Constitution instead of their own interests. People who protect democracy instead of subverting it." As Thomas Mitchell took his final breaths, he handed his son one last document. It was a letter written in Ronald Reagan's handwriting and dated just 3 days before the assassination attempt. The letter was addressed to future presidents of the United States and contained Reagan's promise that no American leader would ever again face the choice between serving the people or serving a shadow government. "The office belongs to the American people, and I will make sure it stays that way, no matter what it costs me." Thomas Mitchell died that night, taking with him the last living memory of the Guardians. But his confession lived on, hidden in his son's investigation files, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The official story of the Reagan assassination attempt remains unchanged. John Hinckley Jr. acted alone, motivated by an obsession with Jodie Foster. But somewhere in Virginia, David Mitchell keeps his father's confession locked in a safe deposit box, along with evidence that could rewrite American history. The truth about March 30th, 1981 may never be fully revealed. But one thing is certain. Ronald Reagan survived more than just a bullet that day. He survived a conspiracy that threatened the very heart of American democracy. And in defeating his enemies, Reagan ensured that no future president would face the same choice between truth and survival that nearly cost him his life.